Okay, we are going to get started here. I hope everyone is having a great Tuesday. Excited for the second session of Start with Sam. Let's jump right in. So first off, a big welcome if it's your first time joining in for this beginner starter workshop series, or maybe it's your second time. Either way, we're excited to really kick this off and see where things go. And really help people learn Voiceflow, get introduced to conversation design in general, and today make a Linktree experience. A quick reminder that you can access Voiceflow on the desktop app or the browser. Be sure to follow us at Voiceflow HQ on Twitter. We'll be recapping today's workshop as well as pretty much everything that's happening with Voiceflow over there. And then lastly, this workshop will be available to stream on YouTube. If you just search Voiceflow, you can find us there. So a quick introduction, my name is Sam Burns. I'm the growth manager at Voiceflow. You can find me on Twitter at @theburnsy9, or you can always email me, sam.burns@voiceflow.com. I'm relatively new in the last year to conversation design, joined the Voiceflow team, and now excited to bring conversation design in this starter workshop to people in any industry, in any experience, and having a lot of fun doing it. A quick background, if maybe this is your first time ever using Voiceflow, we make it incredibly easy to design, prototype, and launch conversation experiences across voice and chat channels. Today, as I mentioned a multitude of times, and the reason you're here, we're going to make a Linktree experience using Voiceflow. And now you might know a Linktree experience if you follow a brand or a creator that says link in bio, or click here to for all of my channels. And that's a pretty static experience, right? But we want to bring that to voice and chat and make it a multimodal dynamic experience and a creative new way to connect with your audience, if you're a creator, an individual, or a brand. So something a little different this time that we wanted to have some fun with is that I built out a starter pack of assets that everyone can use and build along with me as we go. So I'm going to drop a link to that in the chat right now. And that starter pack has, I think, one GIF and a few images that we're going to use today as we live build. So the next step, obviously, open Voiceflow. Let's call this Linktree. And for today, we're going to be building it for Voiceflow. So I'll just call it Voiceflow Linktree. You can brand it yourself, or you can build the Voiceflow Linktree along with us. And I do want to point out, as you're looking at my Voiceflow screen here, obviously these are all the channels that you can design for. This project could live on an Alexa skill, and Google Assistant. It could really live in any form that you want it to. But for the sake of today and keeping it open-ended, we're going to go with custom assistant and leave it a little bit open-ended. Great. So let's create that project. Awesome. A true blank canvas here. If you do have any questions as we go along, be sure to drop those in the chat. I am monitoring that, and I can hopefully catch anything. We want this to be an interactive live build. So if you do have any questions, please do let us know. So a very quick overview of the Voiceflow canvas. Whether it's your first time or your 100th time, it never hurts to do a quick little brush up here. But on the left-hand side of the canvas, we have two sections, right? We'll collapse this, but we're looking at the response and the user input sections. In a conversational AI, a conversation assistant, there's a conversation between the user and the assistant. Anything that the assistant can deliver, any sort of content, whether that's chat, visuals, GIF, audio, will all live in the response section, right? The assistant's saying something, it's playing an MP3, it's giving a visual like a GIF or a PNG, for example. And then on the other side are the user inputs, right? Anything that the user would input into the conversation to elicit a response, obviously. So that could be, they can make a choice, they could ask for something in an intent, they could be prompted for a response. So those are the two sections that will really play in today as we build here. Again, as we hop in, I really want to make sure that this is as as helpful as possible for everyone. So make sure if you do have any questions that you drop those in the chat as we get going here. Great. So when we start a Linktree experience, we want to think of this, and I'm going to speak in terms of building this for Voiceflow. But if you're, this applies if you're building it for yourself as a personal brand, or you are building it for a small business or even an enterprise company. This will probably follow a very similar pattern in these foundational building blocks. So let's say that we start and someone had just clicked on this, this live link or started the Alexa assistant or invoked the skill, for example. What we would want to obviously welcome them first. So when we welcome them, we want to make it incredibly branded, right? And make sure people know who they're talking to. So let's start, we'll drag this here and we'll just call this welcome, right? And this is just for us as conversation designers to know what we're working with here. And so we know that the assistant's going to say something, but let's say they're doing this on a mobile device or desktop or a multimodal device. Let's also start with a logo. So as we go into that Linktree starter pack that everyone downloaded, let's grab the welcome GIF and we can drag that right into this image block here. And we'll let that upload little by little. Perfect. Great. So now this GIF will autoplay. And it's a great way if you want to just make it you could just have it as a static logo as well. But I really like this as a way to dynamically, creatively grab everyone's attention when they first click on your Linktree, right? So now as this GIF plays, the assistant has to say something, right? And we want to welcome them, right? So, hello, thanks for clicking. Thanks for your interest in Voiceflow, right? Something very simple, just to welcome them and make sure they know they're in the right place. They're getting the information that they need, right? Hello, thanks for your interest in Voiceflow. Great. So now the next step is going to be, we need to clearly and probably pretty quickly, because attention spans are pretty short of any audience, right? We need to quickly and succinctly let them know, let the person who clicked, the audience member, know what they can get from this experience, right? So let's call this, actually, let's do this. Let's give a quick intro of what Voiceflow is, right? So maybe this person has never clicked on your brand before, right? Via social media or via a call to action on your website. So let's actually do a quick intro, right? So what does Voiceflow do, or what does your brand do, or what do you do? We make it easy to design, prototype, and launch conversation experiences, right? Something pretty simple. You can make that, however complicated you want. But this is another way here. We can let's drag that Voiceflow logo from the starter pack and on a visual block here, right? A really nice way to continue the experience, let people know what you do as a brand. And if you think that maybe you want this to be very quick, you can remove this step entirely. But this is a really nice way to set the stage. So let's see, we built 2 blocks here. Let's do a quick test and then see how we're holding up.
Hello. Thanks for your interest in Voiceflow. We make it easy to design, prototype, and launch conversation experiences.
Great. That's a really quick, although these 2 blocks might seem like they take up the whole page, it's a really quick, super simple step 1 and 2 to give a welcome and an intro. But now, as I started a little bit ahead earlier, we now need to let them know, the audience member, what can you do with this Linktree, right? So this is you can call it a menu. Again, this is just for your internal internal design. Let's call this like a menu or channels, whatever you like to call this. And after the conversation will continue by coming up here, right? And as we talked earlier, the assistant so far has been doing a lot of responding, right, or leading the conversation. But now we're at a point in the conversation where we need to actually ask the user for input, right? What do they want to learn about? And today we want to direct them. We're only going to build out 2 specific channels of information, although you could build out 100 if you want. We're gonna do a hypothetical Voiceflow podcast and then YouTube as well. So the Voiceflow YouTube, and that would be 2 ways that you can direct attention to, drive traffic to those 2 platforms, for example. So let's say the assistant will now say, you can learn about any Voiceflow channel here, right? For now, you can say podcast or YouTube, right? And obviously, if you expand this in the future, if you build on this template, make sure that this menu is representative of what the actual options that a user could select from. So now for the first time, we get to go back over here in the user input section, right? Because we're grabbing input from the user now. And let's grab a choice block. Great. So a choice block, obviously clearly in the name, allows the user to make a choice between a variety of options. In this case, we want to build out 2 paths, right? Podcast and YouTube. So let's first create a new intent, right? Or an option that the user could pick from. And let's call this YouTube. Great. Create YouTube. Perfect. And then let's look a little bit deeper. Let's look a little bit deeper on what utterances would be, right? So we'll always keep this handy dandy informational tab here, but utterances are different ways a user can say the same thing, right? So for example, show me how to play the piano, teach me how to play the piano, or tell me, right? But for YouTube, it's pretty self-explanatory because we're saying in the menu, you can select from podcast or YouTube. So then let's say they would probably say, maybe they'd say, your video work, but realistically, they're probably just going to say YouTube, right? Or maybe YouTube channel, right? Some utterances that they could say to enact this choice. So that's great. We have option 1 built out. We see that here. It's YouTube. Oh, I did get a message in the chat. Is it possible to include buttons, for example, in the menu? Yeah, Andreas, we'll show you what the chips will actually look like here when it comes to the prototyping. There are a few options when it comes to actually we're going to use outbound links, hyperlinks, as well as the chips in the prototyping will make it very easy to be clickable in a chat environment or obviously enacting that with voice. So that's a good question, but we can circle back if you have more questions on buttons at the end. Great. So now we have YouTube. We need obviously another path for podcast. So let's do the same thing. In the intent, we're creating this intent from scratch. We're going to say create podcast intent. And then similarly, what are some ways that someone would enact this? They might say, audio show, podcast show, podcast episode, or podcast. Great. So we have those 2 options. This is on our happy path, right? Or the way in which a user would move through our experience and everything would go well, right? Everyone would be happy. But we also need to account for the error path or the repair path, because as we know, every conversation doesn't go perfectly every single time. So that's when this no match would come into play. And for this starter series, it's incredibly important if you're starting in conversation design or you're learning Voiceflow, that you understand the difference between the happy and the error or the repair path. So let's say someone, although we made it very simple, says something outside of podcast or YouTube. We then would need to account for that in this reprompt section. So let's say they went through and said something like, your Twitter, I want to know more about your Twitter. Well, we don't have that built out right now, right? So let's have a catch-all response to let the person know that the assistant hears them, but they don't have the content for that. Here are the 2 options that you can. So I don't have an answer for that channel currently. You can pick from podcast or YouTube. Great. It's just a nice, simple way to remind everyone what's going on, or recenter, repair the conversation, and put them back on the happy path. So hopefully this user then would select podcast or YouTube. Great. So you won't see that reflected here in the choice, but it is reflected in the no match here of the step. Great. How do we feel so far? Any questions? Make sure you drop those in the chat as we go. You can use the Q&A function or the chat. I'm checking that over here as we go. So no worries if you have anything. So now we have the guts, the back end under the hood of YouTube and podcast. But now we actually need to share some information with these people as they want to click through and learn more. So let's build out a YouTube step, right? So let's do that over here. Keep it simple, and we'll call this YouTube. You got to keep it organized, otherwise you might go a little bit crazy as a conversation designer. And let's connect this. Let's say the users select YouTube. Let's bring them up to YouTube. And here's a quick beginner pro tip. If you right click on this block and you go to block color, I love to switch YouTube to red. Very easy, right? YouTube branding is red. It really makes it a visually easy to understand your design, especially if you share this with a team or a friend even. You want to make sure it's very easy to digest. So great. So now we're in YouTube and we're going to say, let's actually hop back over to the Linktree starter pack, the downloads, and we'll grab the YouTube header PNG. And let's create a visual holder here, placeholder, add a visual. And we'll drag that PNG here, if I can grab it, to the image section here. Great. And this is a great opportunity to blend voice, visuals, and chat. This is a sample header of maybe what you'd have as a header on your YouTube page, for example. And it just really brands the discussion, makes it very clear that they're looking and learning about your YouTube page. So now this is a great chance. So we already have a speak block there to go in. And then the assistant can say something like, we post videos once per week over on our YouTube. It's a great place to learn conversation design, right? So a little background, a little information, that's great. But now this is where it's incredibly helpful as a Linktree experience to actually serve up an outbound link, right? So we would want someone in this experience to use our call to action or our CTA to actually click through, check out our YouTube page, and maybe even subscribe, right? So let's say you can find our page at youtube.com/Voiceflow. Great. And it won't show here that it's a live link, but let's actually test it really quickly and see how it pops up.
We post videos once/week over on our YouTube. It's a great place to learn conversation design. You can find our page at youtube.com/Voiceflow.
Great. And as you see, this is a clickable link. We'll actually test the links in the prototyping at the end, but just wanted to show you there. And it's a great chance as a conversation designer to catch your typos. Not out page. We don't want that. We want our page. So there you go. Great. So this is one of the paths, right? The YouTube path. A very easy, succinct summary of what they find there. And hey, here you can click on this. As we can already see, this is a little bit more dynamic than a standard Linktree experience because you're actually being able to tell a story, share valuable content, and actually have a conversation with your audience long before they ever click through and learn more about your next step, deeper layer content. So now we have YouTube. Clearly, the next step is we need to build out a podcast. So let's drag that down here. We'll get the YouTube out of the way just a little bit. We'll drag this up here and let's call it podcast. Wonderful. What color should podcast be? I like purple. Let's make podcast purple. And we have to make sure we're dragging this to connect the conversation. So if they select podcast, then we give them the podcast content on the path of the conversation. Perfect. And let's, we have we do have a podcast header. So let's also grab a visual here. And let's, in the Linktree starter pack, let's grab the podcast header PNG and we'll drag that over. And we don't want that yet. Great. So now we have this Voiceflow podcast. This hypothetical podcast, and maybe you'd use your cover image or your show art, for example. This is a great place to visually brand and communicate that. But now we need to give a little bit of a background, right? So we'd say, let's say we drop one episode per week on all of our streaming platforms. Just a little bit of background on maybe the frequency of the cadence for your show. And now, what better way to get someone hooked on a podcast than to use an audio clip, right? So let's give a little bit of context. The next speak block down here. Let's say, here's a quick snippet from our last episode, right? This is something you would never be able to do with a standard Linktree. They would have to actually click through to then listen to your episode. Right here, you're already providing value right away. So now we have, here's a quick snippet from our last episode. Let's drag an audio block here, right? Because now we want to serve up an MP3 audio file. And let's grab the podcast clip.mp3 from the Linktree starter pack, and we'll drag that in and drop it. Perfect. So we see that here. You can test it here, but we're going to test the entire step. Let's go ahead and test and see how it sounds.
We drop one episode per week on all of our streaming platforms. Here's a quick snippet from our last episode.
Sometimes voice is a superior experience to anything else. And so it's not always about replicating what we currently have with voice or conversational AI. It's about revolutionizing it. And it's about thinking outside the box and figuring out those use cases that don't exist yet, where voice is just a perfect solution.
Perfect. So a really nice way to communicate what your show might be about, a highlight reel, maybe it's your intro, just a short MP3 to really grab the user and hopefully make them a listener, right? So great. This is the very quick and easy way to build out these content sections, right? YouTube, podcast. If you were to, let's say, add a social media one or a website or a newsletter, each of those can be built out in a similar function, and we would add a choice down here so that it would be very simple for them to then connect to the conversation. So to answer Andrea's question earlier, let's click this and do a quick test.
You can learn about any Voiceflow channel here. For now, you can say podcast or YouTube.
Great, so we can click YouTube channel or podcast. Let's go YouTube channel.
We post videos once/week over on our YouTube. It's a great place to learn conversation design. You can find our page at youtube.com/voiceflow.
Perfect. So now we're confident that experience works. We tried that path. And as we wrap up here in the last 15 minutes or so, we do need to also consider and be kind to our users, especially if they're a new person in our audience for the brand or for your personal brand, or even just an organization that you're doing this for, right? So after they listen to both of these pieces of content, we can't just leave them high and dry, right? And this is an integral part of any conversation design. You would never just have a conversation with someone, they'd ask you your name, and then you turn around and walk away, right? You would actually need to say, well, it was nice talking to you, or have any more questions for me, right? And that's what we also need to consider as we make this a very human, natural, organic conversation. So let's think about this now as what comes after, right? So let's say, let's just call this more, right? I always just like putting a question mark in there so you know what you're doing. And let's have both of these blocks actually come back up to here, right? So no matter where they come through, YouTube or podcast, we come to this more question, right? So here we have the assistant say, do you want to learn about more of our channels, right? Just a simple question, but maybe they do, maybe they don't. We need to be able to give them the right information. And this is where we can bring that choice block back. And as you see here, you don't need to build out a yes or a no. We already have those built in here. So let's say, the yes is there, and then we'll add a path for no, right? Because it's a pretty yes or no question. There's not really an open-ended prompt in this scenario. So yes or no. And let's say, if it's yes, they want to learn more, we don't need to go through the whole process of rebuilding everything we just did, right? We already have that menu built out. So let's drag this all the way back to the menu here. Great. And just for clarity, let's see. So we can click on this line here. So you see how it kind of gets hidden underneath all of the design right now. Let's click on that and drag it so it's very clear for our own sanity, or maybe you're working on a team. Let's drag this down here. You can clearly follow where this goes, right? So if they say yes, we're going to go down, 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 up to, okay, you can learn about any Voiceflow channel here. For now, you can say podcast or YouTube. Great. So if they want to learn more, they can say yes. But if they say no, we also don't want to just end the conversation either, right? We need to say finish. And let's make finish a green, perfect. And let's just say, thanks for learning about our Voiceflow channels. Nice, something on brand and welcoming. Actually, more of a parting message here. And then we also have one more block. Let's use that hyperlink function one more time, because this is a great way to leave your audience with a CTA that you want them to know before they leave your Linktree. Let's say you can always learn more about us at voiceflow.com. Great. Perfect. And now we know that the conversation has ended. So let's grab this exit. Perfect. So we know if it gets to that point, the conversation's over. We need to make sure that this no goes to here, right? Do you want to learn more about our channels? No, I do not. So let's finish up with you. Thanks for learning about that. So let's do a quick test of this now.
Do you want to learn about more of our channels?
Let's say, no, we're finished.
Thanks for learning about our Voiceflow channels. You can always learn more about us at voiceflow.com.
Great, and we can click on that easily there with the hyperlink. Perfect. So if you built along with me, or maybe you were just watching, I encourage you to always zoom out when you're building and just take a quick look of like, okay, this is the conversation I built. Here it is. Does it make intuitive sense? Does it make logical sense as you look at it from a visual perspective? Okay, now let's do a test of it using the text function here. So let's start from the beginning. We'll just click this run button up here. Let's see what happens. And we'll click run test for now.
Hello. Thanks for your interest in Voiceflow. We make it easy to design, prototype, and launch conversation experiences. You can learn about any Voiceflow channel here. For now, you can say podcast or YouTube.
Great. Let's do YouTube first.
We post videos once/week over on our YouTube. It's a great place to learn conversation design. You can find our page at youtube.com/voiceflow. Do you want to learn about more of our channels?
Let's say yes, we do want to learn about the podcast as well.
You can learn about any Voiceflow channel here. For now, you can say podcast or YouTube.
So let's say let's learn about the podcast now.
We drop one episode per week on all of our streaming platforms. Here's a quick snippet from our last episode.
Sometimes voice is a superior experience to anything else. And so it's not always about replicating what we currently have with voice or conversational AI. It's about revolutionizing it. And it's about thinking outside the box and figuring out those use cases that don't exist yet, where voice is just a perfect solution.
Do you want to learn about more of our channels?
Well, now we learned about both of them, right? So that's easy. We can say, do you want to learn more about our channels? No, I do
Thanks
not.
for learning about our Voiceflow channels. You can always learn more about us at voiceflow.com.
Great. And let's do a quick test. If you guys can see that, it just opens up another tab window there to be a browser. So that's voiceflow.com there. So great. So that's a very foundational project, starter project for building a Linktree. And Robert, I did see your note just now about the question you had there is there a way to have the visual language display different than the spoken version, right? And I'd love to learn more about your use case. So I'll definitely email you after this so we can really get you on the right track. But I did see a very interesting example here that we can look at. So here, as we went through the test, right, it said we post videos 1/week, right? And clearly we meant 1 per week. So for something like this is a great opportunity as a conversation designer and as a tester to say, make sure it does say we post 1 per week. Once per week. And you can even change it to your once per week. And making sure that assistant, depending on the mode that you're designing for, is that it's very targeted. But again, Robert, I will send you an email after this so we can get to the bottom of maybe your specific use case. But I would say on the whole, as a designer, it's your responsibility to make sure that it's fit for the user and the platform. So great. Hopefully, if you're live building with me or you're watching this, after the fact and built it, that this is a working prototype for you. And now you can go in and maybe replace it with some of your own assets. As we wrap up here, I'm going to stop sharing once more and then hop into once more time here. If you do have any other questions as we wrap up, I will have a little bit of time at the end of this workshop for questions. And as always, you can email me or DM me on Twitter if you do have any other question as well. So let's hop back into this deck here. Wonderful, perfect. Thanks, Robert. I see your email, and I will definitely take you up on that and send you a message. Great. So as we wrap up here, I do want to also share an actual template that we've already pre-built with Canvas markup. Here's a quick screenshot. I'm going to drop a link into the chat here for anyone who wants to use this. This is a more in-depth, I'd say level 2 or 3 creator Linktree template, right? And maybe geared towards what we just did, but another channel using lead generation databases, right? We built out for podcasts, YouTube, newsletter. You can collect emails. There are some next step voiceful skills in here that I think if you feel like what we just built is a great check off your list of being a starter, this is on the next place I think is a great place to jump in and see what you can build and switch out some of the content and play around. So this is a really great template to play around with and try. Also, I wanted to celebrate and give a pretty cool announcement here. We just launched today our newest feature, which is called Transcripts. It lets you review and analyze all user testing in one inbox. And if you're a newer user to Voiceflow or conversation design, this might be a higher level use case. But everything we just did in that project, right? And we went through and we tested and we tried. All of those conversations in the prototypes, in the user tests that we do are going to be logged in the transcripts tab, right? All those conversations. So we would show up on the left-hand side here as a test user, right? Or the person who did try it. And this is a great way to go through and see how are users actually using my assistant and my conversational experience? What's the conversation with the assistant like? Is there a point of confusion each time? Or is everyone asking for my Twitter, but I don't have a Twitter intent built out? All really good opportunities to try and improve your conversation through the testing phase. So this is a beta feature that's available to all plans currently. So it's a great chance to jump in today, give it a test run as you go, and you build out your templates and your projects we just started working on. Just had a question: are transcripts limited to developer mode only, or can they be captured in production too? I'm not exactly sure with what you're referring to. I know that this new feature is tied to any sort of prototype or test that is run within Voiceflow on a project, right? So as long as it's being built in Voiceflow and being tested, you're going to get all those conversations through production, through the testing and the prototyping phase. If you have a more specific question or use case, happy to answer that via email as well. But it's a good question, as obviously this is a beta feature and we continue to change and evolve it. Would love to keep everyone in the loop, and make sure you follow us on social as we continue to launch new features around user testing as well. Lastly, I want to give a big thank you to everyone who did join today, or everyone who's watching the stream after the fact. We'll continue to do these Start with Sam workshops each month, typically the last week of the month. So look out for what we'll do next month, as well as a variety of other expert AMAs, workshops with other experts and conversation designers. So make sure to go to voiceflow.com/events for all of our events that are coming up. So great. That does it for me today. We just made it under 45 minutes. Hopefully that was a great morning or lunch or midday, depending on where you're tuning in from today. And excited to see what everyone builds with this Linktree concept. And I appreciate you all for joining the second session of Start with Sam. Have a great rest of your day.